Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Regenerative Grazing and Soil Health webinar. Thanks for coming today. My name is Darron Gaus, and I am a Sustainable Ag Specialist here at NCAT, and I'm based out of our San Antonio office. And I'm also joined today with another Sustainable Ag Specialist, Nina Prater. Nina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name's Nina Prater, and I'm a soil specialist out of our Fayetteville, Arkansas office. So just the Texas neighbor. And I've been with NCAT for about since 2016, working on soil and grazing issues primarily.
Okay, I think we're gonna kick things off just to see who's in the room with a little brief survey that should only take a few moments, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, we just want to get a sense of who's here and what kind of work you're doing and where you're from. Just 4 questions on this poll. Can everyone see it?
Get some answers rolling in now.
Yeah. All right. Looks like most people have participated. I'll close it down and share who's here. So it looks like we've got a lot of good mix of people here today. That's great.
All right, well, let's get things started. Thank you, everyone, for participating and being here today. And I want to introduce our guest speaker, Travis Krause. Travis is the CEO and founder of Grazing Lands. He is a graduate of Texas A&M University Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences and a 7th generation Texas rancher and landowner. He currently resides on his family ranch, Parker Creek, near D'Hanis, with his wife, Mandy, and 3 boys. They are committed to regenerative agriculture production and creating healthy habitats for livestock, wildlife, and people. So we will have a Q&A at the end, and feel free to use the chat feature as you listen along. So with that, Travis, welcome and take it away.
Great, thank you, Darron. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can start the presentation. Make sure it all works. No. Darron, does it look good?
It's good on my end.
Okay, great. All right, we'll go through the presentation. Feel free to drop a question in the chat as you might have them, and I'll do my best to cover them or backtrack if I need to. And then we'll save some time at the end. Darron will have a brief presentation as well on the soil for water work, and then we'll have some Q&A at the very end for 20 to 30 minutes, something like that. We'll just see how it goes. So I'm gonna start rolling. I thought the first thing to clarify, and depending on who our participants was, the whole idea of this was originally to demystify regenerative grazing. And I think one of the problems that we tend to have is there's a lot of definitions and a lot of different types of grazing out there. I'm not going to read through these, but as many of us know, there are a lot of ways to skin the proverbial cat when it comes to grazing. And the list goes further on than what I even have posted here. What I have mainly utilized over the years is the middle two, AMP grazing and holistic plan grazing. I have not done an extensive amount of mob grazing, and we'll get into that. Mob grazing tends to be much quicker moves and at extremely high density. So I think the first thing that we need to understand is what we're trying to achieve with our grazing program and our ranch, right? So for me, it's always started at the top with economics and are we a profitable operation? And there's a lot of argument around whether that profit is economic or another type of profit, maybe a lifestyle or something like that. I'm part of a Ranching for Profit executive link, and this argument comes up a lot. What does profit really mean at the end of the day? Because unfortunately, there are not a lot of people operating at a profit. I work with a bookkeeper in Idaho that takes care of my books and helps me work on like KPIs and baselines and stuff like that. And he specifically caters to Ranching for Profit alumni, and less than 50% of his clients are profitable, even as RFP alumni. So it kind of gives you this insider view of what the economic environment out there really is like. And it's even more difficult right now, as many of us know. Even though prices are ticking upwards, the cost of doing business is the highest it's ever been. And the second part that I tend to think about is ecological function. How are we impacting the 4 different major ecological functions that savory and holistic management has preached for many years? And then the third part is the effect on people. And this is kind of the 3 legs of the stool, if any of you have ever looked at that. And I had a real big eye-opener in the past 2 years about how important it is to really think hard about the people side. How you manage those people is critical, because as you grow an operation or you scale it larger than yourself, this part becomes even more critical than just dealing with family members and the normal managing stuff. And these people spend their entire day working for you and trying to improve your business and your operation. And it's our duty to provide a rewarding lifestyle and a rewarding workplace for these people. And I honestly think that the third part is one of the least talked about components of regenerative grazing, unfortunately. And it's probably the most important, because if we don't actually go out there and move the cattle, guess what? They don't get moved. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. But to give you a little bit of context of myself and where I come from, I'm, as Darron mentioned, a 7th generation rancher. We're raising the 8th generation here in '92. It's been in my family. Parker Creek Ranch has been in my family since 1846. I was born and raised here on the ranch. My dad was a commodity beef producer who went belly up in the late 80s during the big downturn. After that, he went to work on offshore in the oil field, and he became a part-time rancher, and my mom took care of most of the work around here. And so I grew up ranching and in the ranching community and saw the upsides and downsides. And I went to school at Texas A&M, and when I got out, I went to work for the Gates family, a project funded by the Gates Family Foundation in Southeast Asia. And I did that for a while and traveled all over the world. And then I really decided that I wanted to come home and try this stuff out, what we now call regenerative agriculture, which was about 13 years ago for me. And really got into the clean food aspect of it and the soil regeneration and everything, and educating the public about why it was important to do all that stuff. So that my wife and I built Parker Creek Ranch for a little bit over a decade, and then we made a pivot here recently. I began working for SoilWorks Natural Capital. I took a CEO position as one of the at one of the companies called Grazing Lands. and helped start most of the other companies in the portfolio. And I'm also an associate in the portfolio, meaning I do economic analysis and stuff like that for the greater portfolio. So, you know, I kind of, when Nina approached me about doing this, we were actually supposed to do it about 2 years ago, and then COVID hit and everything got delayed. And the title Demystifying Regenerative Grazing like really kind of struck me, you know, when she approached me about doing this. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, what do people really need to hear, right? Too often we talk about how to build a fence or set up a water system or paddock design and all these other things. And I was thinking to myself, what are the real keys to making this work, right? That we need to get a better understanding of, that you don't often hear at a field day or something like that. And these were some of the 4 critical lessons that I feel like I've taken away over my 13 years of doing this type of grazing and livestock management. And starting at the top, you know, finding balance, not just for yourself, but for the land, and realizing that what works for someone else may not and most likely won't work for you. So working within your context and really defining your goals so that you know how to work within and build upon that context is critical. And then the second part is truly understanding forage supply and the demand that you're placing on that forage. And there's a couple of key components to that. Number one is measuring the forage and understanding what is my forage supply. And second, knowing your demand. What are the tools available to me to help me gauge those two? And then understanding forage utilization rate, something that in my 13 years, I've never heard anybody talk about other than someone telling me 25%, and that's it. You can never get above that, you know? And I have realized that that is not true. And we have the data to prove it, actually. And then optimizing your stocking rate within that forage supply and demand. And the reason that's important is twofold. Number one, when we put cattle on a piece of land, by default, we are creating an ecological impact. What are the goals of that ecological impact, right? So it kind of goes back up to the top and understanding your context and your goals. And that can change very rapidly on you because of a drought or an environmental situation. It can also change very rapidly on you due to market conditions and other factors. And then second part of that is when you do learn how to optimize your stocking rate, you're also optimizing your chance of being profitable. So, and that all ties back to that understanding forage supply and demand. And then at the very bottom is animal performance. I have seen so many people get into this space over the past 13 years. And I go to their properties to look at their cattle, and their cattle look absolutely terrible. And I don't think they understand that when you start doing higher stock densities and quicker moves, it can have a very rapid impact on animal performance. And understanding how to gauge animal performance, knowing what to look for, is really critical to making all this work. It is one of the first things that I teach our employees now at Grazing Lands that are actually actively involved in the day-to-day management, is knowing what to look for on the animal performance side. Because the simple fact of the matter is, if your animals aren't performing, you won't be doing regenerative grazing much longer because you will not have any money left. Okay, so let's kind of deep dive into these, and we'll see how things go. So you know, this is going to also tie into the rest of the presentation, so I may not spend as much time on certain slides and more time on others. But one of the things that I have it's taken me a while to figure out is matching my herd to the context of the land, and also to my personal context, right? So what kind of animals do I know how to manage, or my employees know how to manage? And I'll give you a great example. Last year, we had about 60 inches of rain at Pajarito, which was almost record rainfall for that ranch. And it's a sandy loam ranch, and it has a lot of bottom areas. Well, what happens when you have an excessive amount of rain? You're doing regenerative grazing and you have a lot of water standing. You get hoof rot, okay? And what happens if you don't know how to assess locomotion scores and lameness, or even treat it, right? So going back to matching the herd to your context, if you're running a ranch, think about the type of animal you're putting on there just beyond the ecological goals. For example, if you really want to create better ecological function, then you probably need to think more about cows, because you can make them consume certain types of forage at times of the year where otherwise a stocker you'll lose money on because you won't be gaining weight. Anyways, moving on, we could talk about that as a whole presentation in itself. Timing and animal impact, those two really tie together. And what I meant by timing was understanding how much time do I have available to commit to this, and how much time will my herd need to be there in order to match my needs as a livestock manager. Too often we think of timing just as, okay, the cattle have this amount of space available, there's this much forage there, they will take this much in 5 hours, and then I need to move them. Well, there's a lot more to think about there, because you have to go over there in 5 hours to actually go move them then, right? Or you may need to go over there in 3 hours because they may have consumed that forage faster than you think they did. So there's all sorts of timing factors to take into effect here. People, making sure that either yourself or your employees are content and happy with their work and not being overworked. I have seen more people in the regenerative agriculture space overworked than any other type of agriculture I've ever been around. You know, it's shocking. And we too often idolize, you know, oh, I woke up at 5 a.m. and I didn't quit working till 9 o'clock. That may work when you're young and in your 20s and you have lots of energy and you don't have a wife or children. But when those things start to happen, you quickly realize that it's not just about you, and that there is more to life than working from 5 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And I say all this because I've been there and I've done that. And that goes into the context, you know, let's go back to context. What is your context? What are your goals? Sorry about that. Keeps. So, you know, going back to matching your herd to your context, you know, and creating animal impact, there are a lot of different ways to graze. This is a switchgrass pasture at Pajarito, and this was the before and after effects. And I've showed this picture to a lot of people, and I've gotten the craziest feedback. It's like, oh, you didn't graze that right. You didn't do this right. You didn't do that right. I don't really care. At the end of the day, it worked for me in my context. And that's why I wanted to show you that picture. And I got the goals that I was set out for by doing that. I shouldn't say me and my team, because I'm not the guy out there moving the cattle anymore. I'm the guy sitting in the truck watching them move the cattle in the rain if they have to, or if they choose to, I should say. So it is a team sport for me now. And I'm not just the guy out there doing all the work. So moving to understanding forage supply and demand, two components: forage supply, forage demand. How do we know how to do those things? So we have to figure out a way to measure the forage supply. And well, we already saw that. So the traditional way of measuring forage supply has been going out with a grazing stick or two people standing apart and calculating an ADA. And I did that for a greater part of a decade. And it works, but it's very time consuming. For example, at Pajarito, we measure the forage on a monthly basis to understand how we can optimize the stocking rate. Because as we all know, we can go very rapidly from wet to dry or vice versa, especially in South Texas. And that has been the case for a very long time. And in environments where you do have rapid changes, and I would also say that this is, it's not just for brittle environments, that we deal with in South Texas, it's probably for everywhere. We need to be understanding that forage supply all the time if you're doing this to really optimize that ecological functionality and profit margins. So we went from manually measuring to using the rangelands analysis platform. I discovered this a couple of years ago. It's been around for a while. Somebody on here will probably know more about it than I do for sure. It is an incredible tool. And I can't believe the number of people that I talk to that have never heard of it before. And basically, it takes satellite data and extrapolates it for your land. That's a KML file of Pajarito right there. And it can tell me at any given time. So it takes satellite imagery, infrared imagery every 16 days, 16-day cycle. And in that 16-day cycle, it measures the real-time growth of pounds per acre of forage being grown on every single piece of land. And it even excludes water and all these other things, right? Within the RAP data, you can also look at percentage of woody vegetation, perennials, forbs, all this really neat stuff. It's just an absolutely amazing tool. And it's really, I was really skeptical of it at first. I mean, you look at it and you're like, this is too good to be true. You're telling me I can go back over a 10-year period and know exactly how much forage was produced on a piece of land. And I'm a little skeptical of some of the earlier data from like the late 90s, but I think the later data is like spot on. I mean, we have taken manual measurements and done a reverse calculation of pounds per acre, and it was less than 100th off of our calculation. Okay, so it's incredibly accurate is my point. And the days of going out and manually measuring forage are coming close to an end, I believe, as long as we have the internet available, well, let's kind of talk a little bit about how I use the rangelands analysis platform. So this is the data that it gives you on the 16-day cycles. It gives you the 16-day production. And then on the third column, you will see the cumulative production. This is in pounds per acre produced on the property. This is our current data for Pajarito. And then you'll see the percent of the average. We came into the year with a lot of forage at Pajarito, and boy, did it come to an end really rapidly. We were fortunate enough to come out of last year leaving too much forage behind. And so we still had really good growth earlier in the year. We had a lot of forbs coming up. And then you can start to see in February, March, April, we start to get really a lot below average. What's interesting is our precipitation was way below average, which we'll get to a chart that shows that. but we were able to maintain a relatively high percentage of forage production, which I find very interesting. So let's keep moving. This is also some data that it gives you. You will see that the average year would be somewhere in the middle on the gray line. The very bottom is like the worst drought on record type of averages for 16-day production. We were somewhere between those two, which I was pretty happy with, because I felt like our neighbors, they were probably at the very bottom. They had 0 left in their pastures. You can also look at a cumulative production plot that it will do for you if you export the data. And once again, we're somewhere right between that average and the very worst case scenario. Look, beyond rangelands analysis platform and all these other things, there are a ton of ways to go out there and measure forage supply demand and understand what you have left. I like to think of us as I call us the moneyball of ranching, of regenerative ranching, because we extrapolate just tons of data and use it to our advantage. And, using these kind of metrics, we typically build out something along these lines, right? Like a HMI or savory grazing plan. And as I've gotten busier in life, yes, it's important to take time to meet with your team and do a lot of planning, but these things kind of drive me bonkers. And I think for the normal grazer, grazing plans, we could sit here and argue all day long about how great they are and how important they are to do, and I will not argue with you. But I think it's way over most people's heads. I think we need to come up with simpler tools that help people analyze how to stock their ranch and how to optimize those stocking rates. So what's amazing is all of a sudden we have this new technology available, like Pasture Map, Maya Grazing, AgriWeb, that helps us plan and do all these things where we don't have to do it on paper anymore. So we do utilize these tools quite a bit. I'll be a little biased. I think Pasture Map is a very user-friendly tool that, but it has some downsides. SoilWorks, just a disclaimer, at SoilWorks, we own Pasture Map. So, but I do think AgriWeb and My Grazing have definitely passed us up on the availability of all the great tools that they've built within their software to help make this easier, going from set stocking, traditional ranching to more regenerative grazing. Getting more into the data and what is important to understand when it comes to forage supply. We're still focused on supply here. Rainfall is all part of the equation, and understanding where that rainfall is on your property. Fortunately, a lot of these apps have software built into them to help you understand this stuff. This is something that we actually track manually with an Excel file. This year is the red line in 2022. It was rough. So at the beginning of the year in January, we were stocked at about 900 head of cattle on 5,300 acres at Pajarito. And it was not raining. And it was pretty scary. And we had a lot of forage left over in the year. And right there in July, where you see it bottoming out, we had 5.1 ADAs left on the ranch. That's it. So we had not eaten our litter yet, but we had 5.18 animal days per acre left on the property. And then it started raining in August. I think we had about 7 inches in August, and we've had about 1 inch in September. And now all of a sudden, I went from not having any forage, so we were 20 days away from destocking, to now I need to, and we did destock some. So we went from 850 head to 450. We did a 50% destock. And we let the data drive that for us. It told us what to do. And now I'm in the situation where I need to put back on another 200 head so that I can optimize my profitability here in the spring. This is a chart of animal units versus the forage growth. The green line is typical forage production. That is our historical average since 1986. January through December. That is our forage production cycle for that specific ranch. You can get that data through the Rangelands analysis platform, and understanding what the forage production is for a particular piece of property is critically important. Too often we go by like a regional forage production chart, and as many of us know, each and every ranch is different. And so that 1 to 10 stocking rate is what we thought the ranch could be at. The county average for Wilson County, where Pajarito is located, is 1 to 14.6. And it shows you kind of where we were on our animal units. Like I said, in March, and then we started destocking. And by August, we cut the herd literally in half, as you can see right there on the 375. Nina, can y'all see my cursor when I move it around on the screen? You can? Okay, great. So right here at the 375, we were half, virtually half of what we were starting in March, April. We had brought on a lot of cattle, so we cut the herd in half. Here we are in September, October. We were kind of planning. That was a plan. Okay, if you go past August, that's our planned ratio there. Well, now we know we need to bump it back up because we measure SDA per inch of rainfall as stock days per acre per inch of rainfall. Okay, so right there in July, when you see that 1.2 and 1.21 here in August, that was when we had that 5.1 animal days per acre left. Okay, imagine this as sort of an inverse chart right here. When you look at it up here on top above the 1 to 10 line, here's the 1 to 14. That's our normal county ratio right there. We try to operate somewhere in that 1 to 10 range because we feel that that's probably a pretty good average for that ranch to get started. We've only been on that ranch for about 2 years. If we would not have received any rainfall or even normal rainfall, so this is based on normal historical rainfall, we would have been severely above our stocking rate right here at 1.8. I mean, we would have been out of grass and cattle starving to death. So down here, when you're at 0.38 and below the line, that's when you're understocked. Okay. And you can look at this over whatever kind of time frame you want to and understand how it moves. But there's tools that I think are even better than this. Such as one of the tools that Maya Grazing offers, and that's understanding, being able to forecast your stocking rate. So the way it works is your x-axis is your dry matter per acre. Okay, that's your pounds of production per acre. I use this chart because we needed to make a few changes to our manual chart that we built on Excel. So we built this into Excel. I decided to scalp this off of Maya because it basically looks the same. And then your y-axis is time, right? So what it's doing is this is SDA per inch of rainfall, but being projected out forward and understanding, okay, how do I optimize my stocking rate going forward? What we have done is we have pulled the data based on rainfall and the pounds of production per acre. And we have been able to effectively say, based on what the rain pattern is doing, we know moving forward, it will produce approximately this many pounds of forage per acre. Thus, we know it's time to buy. And you can do the exact opposite. Now we're going down, we know it's time to sell cattle. Which gets me into another thing that is often not discussed in regenerative grazing. That's understanding how to stock your ranch. What we've decided in South Texas, so South Texas is not great stocker country. It never has been. You can talk to a lot of old ranchers around here that can tell you, and I didn't want to listen to them, so I tried it myself, and the gains are too low. In the stocker business, you need to be 1.5 to 2 pounds per day to be profitable, really, and that's even at a low cost to carry. And in South Texas, you're just not going to get that on average. There will be times of the year when you will get 2 to 3 pounds per day. We measure our cattle every quarter. We weigh them when they're stockers every quarter. And we do achieve 2 to 3 pounds of gain per day for about a 1 month period, 1 to 2 months. And that's usually towards the end of summer when the forage is sending sending the protein up and the carbohydrates down, and you're getting this like really high protein type of grass going on. But our protein is just too low in South Texas to grow stocker cattle. So what we've decided to do to once again match the context of your herd with the landscape is we have a base herd of cows, and then we run a flex herd on top of that base herd of cows. And the flex herd can be anything you want it to be. Right now, I'm taking the market opportunity to buy wet bag cows, for example, and we're buying thin bred cows and thin pairs. Everything coming out of South Texas right now is still thin, even though all of South Texas has received a substantial amount of rainfall. They still can't grow any grass because they're grazing it wrong. So they're still selling their cows, even though they've got 10 inches of rain. Okay, rant over there, but getting on to actual and then suggested stocking rate. This is sort of just another iteration of SDA per inch of rainfall to help you better understand how to optimize that stocking rate. Like I said, what we have realized is absolutely critical to achieving our ecological goals and also our economic goals is making sure that at all times I'm optimizing that stocking rate. And I just don't know of any better way to do it. The old-fashioned grazing chart does not do the job. It just doesn't. For me, it doesn't. Some people that have been using it for like 20 years, they can look at it and they can go to town and understand it better than I can on optimizing their stocking rate. But I think these types of tools are the more modern tools that are going to be critical to helping us make better decisions. It's data driven. Getting into forage utilization rates. This is something that I rarely find discussed. Most extension agents will tell you that you will never achieve above 25% forage utilization. Forage utilization is the amount of forage in the paddock that the cow is actually able to consume and put in her gut. Okay, that's what forage utilization is. And most people will say 25%, that's just the golden standard. You'll never get above that. This was some Iowa State University research that they did. And as you can see on the left side, the forage utilization rate followed the pasture utilization rate almost to a T. The more paddocks that they use, the higher you could increase that rate. 70 to 75%. I've not been able to achieve 75%. We've gone out and measured. We've achieved, and using the RAP data, you can use the RAP data to know, okay, how much forage did I consume? We're achieving somewhere around 60% with our moves, and we're doing anywhere from daily to every 3-day moves typically at Pajarito. And I say typically, when it was dry recently, we literally had no rain for almost an 8-month period. We were moving towards more like 5 to 7 day moves at that point because we were slowing the cattle down, forcing them to consume the grass they wouldn't otherwise be consuming. And also that lignant grass typically has a little more feed in it, it seems like, in South Texas than your real lush green grass that just flows through them. And of course, increasing our rest periods as much as we could, right? That's a no-brainer. So the reason this is really important is because when you're calculating forage demand, let's go back to this real quick. When you're calculating forage demand on like AUMs, for example, or let's look at AUMs. That's probably one of the most commonly used. Pounds consumed per day and then number of days per month. Number one, we're looking at, okay, what animal units do we have? So part of our calculation is based on that. So like if it's a cow and a calf that's 300 pounds, the cow weighs 1,000 pounds, that's 1.3 animal units. And then we also need to include forage utilization in here though. So if you're calculating at 25% forage utilization and you're actually getting 60, that is a massive, massive difference. You could be triple the stocking rate and not know it without using that proper forage utilization percentile. That's the point that I'm trying to make there, is on the bottom end, if I'm at 30% forage utilization, that's what I'm using for my calculation to understand forage demand, and I'm actually achieving 70%, I'm going to have a whole lot of forage on that ranch that I'm severely underutilizing because I don't have enough animals. That's why Ian Mitchell Innes always tells people when they're looking at the ranch and not understanding what's going on, one of the first things that always comes out of his mouth is you don't have enough animals, because everybody miscalculates. Trying to slow down a little bit. I may be going too fast, Nina. That'll leave us lots of time. And we can go back to some of this stuff too, if there are lots of questions. Ultimately, animal performance really matters a lot. And what are your animal performance goals? And that really depends on what type of animal you have. For example, if I have stocker cattle, my goal should be average daily gain, right? If I'm not at a high average daily gain or achieving any kind of average daily gain, I'm in big trouble. Not just with myself, but my banker is probably going to be pretty upset too when I go to sell those stockers at the end of the day and I've spent more money than I made, right? So, or is it a cow? Is it a cow in lactation? Is it a cow that's in breeding, right? I mean, there's all sorts of animal performance things to think about. Number one, in my mind, it starts with forage quality. And what type of forage am I dealing with? What do I mean by forage quality? I have no control over forage quality unless I'm in the business of growing annual crops, maybe, right? But I'm a rangeland grazer, just to be clear. Mostly rangelands, do very little annual crop grazing. I've done some, I just can't make the economics work very well for me in where I'm located. But when it comes to forage quality, number one is understanding what is my forage doing in different times of the year. Something that we have made a tradition of is going out every 4 times a year, every quarter, and pulling forage samples and sending them to Dairy One. And just to understand where is our forage, and also carrying around a Brix refractometer and understanding what forages are producing what sugars. Because I've mostly been in the stocker grass finishing business most of my career. And so that's why I really focus on sugars and proteins and stuff like that. And realizing that I don't have as much leniency as a cow-calf guy does when I'm growing stocker cattle. Something I think that's often not discussed enough is forage diversity. I see that problem really often here in South Texas. We have a abundance of Bermuda grass or KR bluestem, and they pretty much dominate an entire pasture. And a lot of also another thing, people just love to spray chemicals here in South Texas on their pastures to kill all the weeds and stuff. I have seen the best gains on stocker cattle, for example, and the best production on cow-calf operations on highly diverse forages. It is it's day and night. I mean, we can move them from a coastal field that has an organic matter of 7%. We have a coastal field at the ranch that has that kind of organic matter. I can move them into a brushy pasture, and the health problems that I was having in the coastal field just disappear. You know, it's incredible because they're getting access to different forages that provide different mineral and nutritional benefits that a single plant, or a single species, I should say, cannot do. Okay. Getting into management, you know, understand what class of cattle do I have? Do I have cows? Do I have lactating cows? Do I have pregnant cows? Do I have stockers? How big are the stockers? Were they just weaned? Are they 45 days weaned? These things are really, really important to gain an understanding of, to be a successful regenerative grazer, because your timing and your management, how much room you're giving those cattle, depends on that more than you realize. You can cram cows into a pretty small space and do like severe grazing, for example. If you have an ecological goal, and that may be to clean the solar panel out in your pasture, that's what I call it, clean the solar panel. Let's clean the pasture up, right? So I want to make them do severe grazing. In other words, I want to make them eat a bite off of every plant out there, or multiple bites. If you do that with stocker cattle, you will lose weight literally in a day. With cows, they're more forgiving. You can do that and they're just fine. Oops. You can do that with cows and they're just fine. Beyond the class of cattle, understanding, are my animals hungry? Are they content? Are they full? Learn how to look at gut fill. I can't say that enough. And that's with any class of cattle. Too many people don't pay attention to gut fill and dung. It will tell you when it's time to move the cows if you pay attention to those two things. Graze period, rest period. This is where seeing the two things above and understanding the class of cattle you're dealing with becomes sort of an art. I do recommend building plans, but just realize that a plan is meant to be changed, okay, as needed. Our plan has never, hardly ever gone on track. It will go on track for a week and then it goes off, okay, and then it throws off the entire rest of your plan. And beyond just grazing and our goals, you know, we have to worry about things like, is it deer season? You know, what agreement do we have with the deer hunters? For example, we make them a promise that we're going to keep our activity to a minimum on the weekends. They pay $40 an acre to hunt on the ranch per year. And we are going to make sure that on the weekends, when they want to come out with their family and have a good time, that they can do so without being interrupted by a cattle siren and guys driving all over the place with an RTV interrupting their deer hunting, right? Or even during the week during deer season, we make them a promise that we don't go out there before 10 o'clock and we're back home no later than 4, you know? So we've got to plan things around all that stuff. Or if I want to go on a vacation, or if the guys want to go on a vacation. Okay, herd size. That's once again goes back to the data, letting it drive you, but understanding in real time. What I meant to say there was going out in the pasture, learning to read your pastures. In a sense, you'll get good enough calculating animal days or animal days per acre, whatever unit of measurement you choose to do. After you do it for a while and you practice it, you get so good that when you go out there and you put the paddock up and you figure, okay, I've got 10 or 15 acres and it's going to last me this many hours or this many days, it becomes almost intuitive. And understanding how your herd size at that time impacts that is really important. herd and paddock size, which I keep going back and forth. And then one of the things that I stress is stockmanship and good sound stockmanship. Too many people think that stockmanship is just what's going on at the cattle pens or when we round up the cattle. I would almost say it is a day-to-day practice. For example, when you are regenerative grazing, all these people really love watching the cattle run through the gate. And when I see the cattle rush through the gate at a running pace, it drives me nuts. We've either done two things wrong. We didn't give them enough forage and they're hungry, or we've created unnecessary excitement by making too much noise or too much anticipation. What I like to see the cattle do is just one by one, or 20 at a time. Our paddocks with 800 head in a herd, they have to be pretty wide gates. Seeing them just walk through slowly, that is low stress stockmanship. And of course, in the receiving pens and the shipping pens, it's critically important. We have rules where when we are working the cattle in the pens, we have a sit down meeting at the beginning to say, here's exactly what we're trying to achieve right now. Here's where this group of cattle is going to go in the pens. This is exactly what we need to do. And if you plan it properly, hardly anyone needs to speak, because I grew up with someone constantly yelling at me that I was doing something wrong while we were working the cattle. And that doesn't work very well. I can just tell you that right now. I've fired multiple people for even cursing at the cattle loudly in the pens. All right. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you do it a whole bunch of times and that's the way you're treating the cattle, just imagine how he's treating his spouse or his coworkers and stuff like that. Stockmanship translates beyond the cattle. It translates to people too. In fact, I have a great story about a friend of mine that went to work in one of the northern states for one of the best stockmanship teachers in the United States. He goes all over the United States teaching stockmanship schools. And he treated the cattle like just amazingly, right? But when it came to working with his team, he would curse at them and yell at them and all these other things. So it goes beyond just the cattle and the grass, and the people are really important too. Getting a little deeper for those of you here that don't understand gut fill, this is what you look for right here on the left-hand side, right above the pen bone there, is gut fill. That is where the rumen is located. When it's full, it pushes out. That is a fat, full, content red Angus steer that didn't grow worth a darn because the red Angus genetics that I bought that year were simply not adapted to our environment at Pajarito. They just absolutely fell apart when it got hot. But boy, he looked pretty in the wintertime right here. There was about 700 head in this 2-acre paddock right here. It just happens. It doesn't look like it because most of the herd was behind me. All right. One other thing when it comes to understanding animal performance is understanding the way grass functions. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with over the years that just lack a basic understanding of how starches and sugars move in the grass. And it is super important to think about. So right here, where we have this sugar happening and the growth, this would be spring at Pajarito, right? We start moving really, really quick. This is where the Brix refractometer comes in really handy as a manager, and understanding how to read the Brix, see where the sugars are going. Of course, it can change at various times of the day. I always tell people the best time to go out and measure your Brix is about midday. Don't do it in the morning. Don't do it in the evening. It's kind of funky if you do it that way. And understand how my rotation is keeping up with this. And why that matters is because we can get this going on, right? With the dung. And this is understanding, I told you, understanding gut fill, understanding dung. It's all part of understanding what is the grass doing. If at any moment I'm passing up on something that somebody remembers is really important or critical that I'm leaving off, please say something in the chat. Because I just finished the presentation last night. And yeah, just going going with what I know over the 13 years. So right here, we're going into this phase. When you reach here, this is when you know when I'm reaching that top right up here on the growth, I need to be letting the cattle stay in there a hair longer to take that grass back down and keep achieving that vegetative state if I can. Now, a drought this year, a drought interrupted us right here. And all of a sudden, when we should normally be seeing this, we were seeing this right here, which is normally in the fall, right? For most folks in this country. Interestingly enough, in Texas, South Texas specifically, we go up right here in the spring, down, and then we have this bump back up in the fall that's real funky. And then we come back down like that. So we have this happen. We have this stage, these 3 stages right here. We have them happen twice a year in South Texas. So we have to adjust our grazing twice a year, our grazing strategy, I should say, based on this. Okay, so understanding the context of where you're located, your piece of property, there may be species on your property that don't match this at all. For example, there are ranches in South Texas that don't see the double curve that I do because they don't have the cool season species coming on in the fall. Like we do at Pajarito. In the fall, we have brome grass, Virginia wild rye, stuff like that that's starting to come on in the fall. And that's why we see that big bump in the fall, because we have all that bottomland. And guess where the cool season grasses love to grow in South Texas? In bottomland. And then during the winter, we come over here, and that's when people start grazing it pretty hard. Just remember, you don't want to start eating your litter. I think that is something that I've learned over the years that is extremely critical, is leaving that litter behind. I've seen too many folks not optimizing their stocking rate at certain times of the year, and they start consuming that litter, and it really bites them in the butt when we get back over here in the spring and you start getting rain and growth. But I've also seen people leave too much litter behind, and you get the soil stays too cold, and then you get a really late start in the spring because of that. These are all the things that just take a decade of experience to learn. What is the rule? 10,000 hours and you finally become an expert? I don't know if I really fully believe that. It may be more like 15 or 20,000, but anyways. All right, dung scores. Why is this important? Because it's a key part of understanding animal performance. Most of you will recognize in the lower part of the picture, I mean, that cow is not doing well, or that stocker, they are not going to be performing. You've got an excess amount of protein and your carbohydrates, and then you're really, really low in fiber, right? So that's why it's really critical to also leave that standing lignant vegetation out in your pasture during the times when you're not getting rain, so you can create balance when it does start to rain again. They can go out there, they can select from the low fiber. The animals know how to do this naturally. Believe it or not, they'll go select the low fiber, then they'll go pick up that high protein carbohydrate grass and create balance in their own room. And lots of people, this is where when they get in this type of situation, or the vice versa over here on the right side, with a lack of degradable protein, really low quality forage, this is where supplementation tends to occur. So if with your grazing strategy, if you can somehow balance it somewhere in the middle, that is ideal. Dung scores are typically done on a 1 through 5 level. This here on the bottom is a 2. This is a 3 in the middle, and this would be right between a 4 and a 5 on top, right there. So if you're getting into 1 over here, you're going to start getting into the phase where you get scours and stuff like that. So this is also a sign of, okay, do I need to be watching my cattle health and things like that too. Another thing I found really important to check occasionally, we do this every so often when we are out looking at the dung and kicking around cow turds, is looking for worms and stuff like that and learning how to identify what's going on there as far as my animal health goes and what I need to do there. All right, we're kind of getting closer towards the end of the presentation. And
Hey, Travis. We had a quick question there just before we move off from that last topic, if I can read it to you. Bonnie asked, what was the problem with not enough litter in the spring? You talked about too much. It could be keep the soil too cold. What was the problem with not enough?
Not enough litter. The problem with leaving not enough litter is you don't retain soil moisture. So it's like this double-edged sword when it comes to litter. You can have so much that it makes your soil cold. And then I've had the experience of being 2 to 3 weeks later on growth than my neighbors, right? When we start getting spring rains, because my soil is cold. So the indicator that the plants use to say, I'm ready to grow leaves, fresh leaves in the spring, has nothing to do with the rain and all that stuff. It's based on soil temperature, right? So if my soil temperature if my soil has like a really thick litter on it, and I'm talking like I've left behind like a 2-inch litter before, 3 inches, it slows down my spring growth severely. So there's a balance to be had there, and that's what I was alluding to. And then of course, if you leave no litter, you're screwing your ability to retain moisture and let the plants have a good fighting chance in the spring when it does rain. So yeah, there's a fine line to walk there. And of course, look, I'm giving y'all like these little gold nuggets of info that I wish I would have known earlier, and this was kind of my goal with today, is to give you these little bitty things that I've learned over the years that have really helped me become a better grazer. And just know that there is no such thing as a perfect graze or a perfectly healthy cow. Like, it is always trying to find the balance, which goes back to the very first thing that I said there. And that is all going to be within your context. So lastly, I wanted to talk about tracking key performance indicators within your grazing system and within your ranch system. I'm not going to get into the economic KPIs. I just wanted to mention them here. But understanding that your economic KPIs are directly influenced by your animal performance, and optimizing your stocking rate and all these other things that we have been talking about today, your ecological goals, all impact your economics and those key performance indicators within your economics. Okay, it's all tied together. And then of course, the same goes for your ecological KPIs. Your grazing decisions, your stocking rate decisions, understanding that supply demand, all this stuff we've been talking about, has a direct impact on your ecological KPIs too. And the reason I bring this up is it's really important to, number one, educate yourself on these things, or hire somebody else to do it for you. Either way, I don't care. Understand what these are, understand how to track that data, and then understanding how to use that data to make better decisions within your operation. We have monthly meetings in our businesses, and we use these things on a monthly basis almost, except the ecological KPIs, we measure those twice a year, some of them only once a year. But the economic KPIs, we're looking at them on a monthly basis, some of them in real time. Okay. And lastly, establishing some kind of baseline. But I want you all to understand that establishing baselines for your operation, it's a twofold deal. Number one, do I even have the data previously to build a baseline off of, right? Or do I have a neighbor or a team of people that I work with, some mentors maybe, that are willing to share their baselines with me? Find a group of people to work with, whether that's your local National Grazing Lands Coalition or, Ranching for Profit Executive Link. There's others I'm leaving off of here because I just don't know of the groups out there all across the country. It is really important to understand where you are performing against other people in the industry, because you may be operating, for example, at a gross margin per unit of, I don't know, 10%, and you're thinking to yourself, oh gosh, I'm so happy with that. And when the baseline may be 40%. So there's some major changes that need to happen in your operation, and you just don't realize it. It goes back to the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And it's very true. Okay. Last thing I wanted to talk about was just, look, if you don't know the Pareto principle, get to know it a little bit. I think it really has a lot to do with grazing. Look, maintaining that 80% of my output in a situation or a system is determined by 20% of my input. People, this goes back to, I've never seen a group of people more overworked and underpaid than a lot of regenerative grazers out there. And I love it. I love the lifestyle just as much as anyone else, but there's balance to be had. And make sure that you're getting this 80-20 out of your system. If I'm putting in 20%, I want 80% coming out of it, right? And how can I achieve that? And the way I've found to achieve it is really tracking the data and utilizing these tools to help make me a better grazer, a better business decision maker, all the above. So there's my info. If you would like to get a hold of me, please send me an email. I prefer that you don't call me because I get like 200 phone calls a day. If you do happen to find my phone number on the internet somewhere, but I will always reply to an email. It may take me a day or two sometimes, but Nina, I'm not sure if we want to do Q&A right now or let Darren go ahead and get into his conversation, and then we can do Q&A.
Darren, do you want to go ahead, and then we'll have a nice solid chunk of questions and answers for both of you at the end. Does that sound good?
Okay, yeah, that works.
Okay, thank you so much, Travis.
Yeah, thank you.
That was great. I know people are having questions. I've seen a few pop up in the chat, so this will be good.
It's hard to cover it
take
all.
Yeah. Take it away, Darren. Darren's going to tell us about NCAT's Soil for Water project.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to tie a lot of what Travis was saying here today with, the regenerative grazing and soil health, and specifically when we talk about water. And so that is the NCAT Soil for Water project, and it's all about catching and holding more water in the soil, kind of focusing on soil health to return the soil sponge. Let's see. There we go. So just a little, how the project began. Right after the 2008-2011 drought here in Texas, which I'm sure if some of you are from Texas, y'all remember that one well. A plan was created in 2012 called the Texas Water Plan. And project founders Peggy Sechrist, who was here today, and Mike Morris began to wonder why this water plan barely mentioned soil at all. And so the Soil for Water project was created to get more people thinking about their soil as the sponge it could be to capture and hold more water. So as you can see on that left-hand side, when a soil is healthy, plant life and or litter covers the surface, and there are large pores that infiltrate water easily. When our soils are degraded, not healthy, they essentially become a cap and shed any water that falls on them. So when we think of capturing and holding more water in our soils, we are looking at creating those healthy soils on your land. And when we think of growing that soil, we're going back to NRCS's 5 main functions of a soil, and look at number 1, regulating water flow and cycling. That's the most important one. And with this water flow, the other 4 functions become possible. Without water flow, we can't sustain plant and animal life. We can't filter and buffer pollutants. The nutrient cycle becomes locked up without proper water flow. And finally, good soil structure that provides the support system for life within it. So to think of our soil health, we utilize the NRCS's 5 soil health principles of keeping the soil covered, minimizing soil disturbance, increased biodiversity, continual live plant and root in the ground, and integrating livestock where we can. And so as we build our soil health in organic matter, we can drastically increase our soil's water holding capacity. It depends on your soil type, but according to this NRCS right here, we can increase up to 25,000 gallons of available moisture per acre with every 1% organic matter we increase. And with the Soil for Water program, you can see the website there, soilforwater.org, at the top left hand of the screen. Our mission, like I said, catch and hold more water in the soil. We believe saving water in soil is a powerful and underused method of water conservation. And we are a peer-to-peer network. So we believe that farmers learn best from farmers. And we also are storytellers. We take producers across the nation and tell their story of how they're changing their landscape. And we believe that stories change behavior as much as or more than science. And then we also believe that landowners will discover soil health innovations through experimentation. So we do trial monitoring and safe to fail trials across the nation to get more relevant information to the producers and stakeholders in this game. So as I said, we can really return our soil to be a sponge for holding water, implementing some of these practices listed here on the screen. I won't go over all of them just in the interest of time. And with the Soil for Water network, we can all learn from each other what is working well and what needs some adaptations. We are doing some on-farm trials, as even with Travis at Parker Creek, we're doing some trials out there just to really discover what changes are happening on the landscape as a result of different management practices. And you can join the Soil for Water network, soilforwater.org. You can join the forum and the network, or one or the other. And there are some membership benefits listed here, including discounts on soil testing equipment, member-only events, and free help setting up safe to fail trials on your farm. And then we also have the forum where you can meet and talk and learn with one another. Lots of great features, and you can see there's lots of great topics on there. You can just sign up and just post your questions as they come along, and one of us will answer it in the network. There's also on the Soil for Water network, there's a Regenerators Atlas, which is a really cool tool. You can put your dot on the map, and then we can, as a Soil for Water team, we tend to look for people that have great stories and share those stories, and so you can all look at each other and see what's going on in the nation as it is in regards to the Soil for Water program. And there's a lot of cool layers on there as well. This precipitation zone layer is really cool because you can see, this dot and this dot are in the same little green area. And so even though you may not normally think of a Nebraska farmer and a Texas farmer, learning from each other, but they do have the same soil precipitation. So cool little features like that. And you can attend workshops and other interesting events. There's an events page. There's an events page that you can quickly see and sign up on. We are getting out there again and doing a lot of cool field days and pasture walks. So keep an eye on the events page. And Soil for Water is now nationwide, and we have a ton of experts across the nation that you can call for assistance on how to better capture, hold, and use water in your operation, including myself and Nina. So again, I just want to say it's soilforwater.org. Go there, get signed up for the network, forum, and atlas. It's free to use. There's no commitments other than the desire to learn in a peer-to-peer network and in order to capture and hold more water in our soil. So I just want to say thank you to our funders, including NRCS and SARE, and thank you all. And Nina, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Darren. I hope everyone will check out Soil for Water. Travis had mentioned, finding people in your area so you can get baselines and learn what your expectations should be. So I think that's one thing we want from Soil for Water, is to be able to connect producers, and so everyone can support each other. Even if you're just working towards this regenerative goal, you don't have to be an expert to plant your flag on the regenerators map. You just need to have that as one of your goals. So don't feel intimidated or anything. Just join on in, and we'll all learn from each other. So with that in mind, but before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to say one of these great events that we're going to have, in-person events, is a pasture walk day with Travis on October 21st. And in a minute, I'll post the link to the event in the chat so you can check that out. And that would be a great event to get started with this fall. So let's see, if anyone has questions, I think if you could post them in the chat, that would be easiest, instead of unmuting and having a lot of background noise. Let's see, what was there that I missed before? Linda Coffey, one of my coworkers here in Arkansas, posted the link to the NCAT calendar, the events calendar. So there's tons of events happening all the time. Let's see. Any questions for Travis or Darren or myself?
Yeah, I saw somebody posted in the chat there about, the microbial effects and all that stuff. And yes, it's absolutely correct that also has an impact based on the soil litter that you left there. What I have found over the years is that when I start to get into the soil health stuff and how grazing affects that, it tends to just really go over a lot of people's heads. And a lot of people just most of us lack a basic understanding of what's going on under the soil. And it all starts though with the grazing that you're doing and the management decisions, and that all has an impact on the soil. And if we're doing the right thing on the top side, by default, the right things are going to happen on the bottom side under the soil. So that's the way I tend to like to think about it. And, Soil for Water has tons of great resources on soil health. NCAT does on their website. And there are a lot of workshops going on all across the United States about microbes and organic matter and Haney and PLFA tests. And oh my God, drives me kind of crazy, because I think a lot of people don't understand it and never will, because it goes over most people's heads. But anyways, it's something to go get educated about as well. So.
Yeah, it is more simple to think of as above, so below. That's how I like to think about it. We're familiar with what's going on above the surface, and it can give us a lot of clues about what's going on below the soil surface, including with water. I always say go out on a rainy day and see where your water moves, and that'll tell you a lot about your soil.
Right. There is a question here from Linda about the data and knowing more on how you use the date to make your decisions. I
You mean data? Maybe how you use the data to make your decisions. You said you use data to drive your decisions.
Okay. Yeah, maybe she meant to say data there. I think, okay, the best way I can answer that is we use the data primarily to make our stocking rate decisions. Okay. And of course, understanding forage demand is the main premise to that. So if I'm able to understand my forage production, I can understand what my stocking rate should be. And so what I use it as is, okay, I'll give you an example. That a few weeks ago, we were actively tracking what was happening on forage supply, and we could see it going down in real time. I didn't get a chance to show you all my other charts and things from Excel that we utilize, but we were able to see in real time that we were on a 16-day basis. Okay, remember the wrap data is 16 days. So every 16 days, I was able to understand, am I oversupplied or undersupplied on forage based on the herd size that I have right now? And a key part of that is knowing exactly how many animals you have on the property and what weight they are. Okay, so if you're getting really serious about this, I do recommend buying some scales. I mean, you can get scales and a scale indicator to put under your squeeze chute for $2,500. Is a minuscule investment for the amount of data you'll be able to get off of scales. Okay, so understanding how many animals do I have, what do they actually weigh, and then utilizing that to understand in that 16-day period, am I tracking down or up, on my forage supply demand? So what's happening on the chart? And if I go for a while, I know that I'm going to run out of forage in 20 days if I don't start seeing more forage supply coming on, meaning more rain, right? So what we do is we tend to make a cut in our stocking rate decision within certain time periods that we have just established. And there's really no rhyme or reason why we've established them. We try to do an average of about a 60-day rest period where we're located. Sometimes it's as low as 30 days, sometimes it's as high as 90, but 60 is kind of our yearly average. So we make our first stocking rate cut at 60 days and then another one at 30 days. And at 30 days, I need to be at 50%. So it takes somebody who's actively out there as part of the management team buying and selling cattle to actually really do this well. But that's why it's important to have that flex herd on hand, so that you don't have to make the really hard decisions right away. You can just unload those cattle opportunistically as that 30 or 60-day market allows itself. This year, we were making decisions almost 100 days out because we changed our numbers. We were trying to achieve 120-day rest periods because that's how little rain we had. So at 120 days out, we started making cuts in our stocking rate. So we had a lot of time to think about, okay, in the next 60 days, where do these cattle need to go? Do I need to find a custom grazer? Do I need to sell them? And then, of course, you have the same problem on the buy side, and it's really easy for me to sit here and say, okay, you need to go sell cattle based on your data, or you need to go buy them, because that's easier said than done because of time constraints, right? But if I'm able to forecast out enough and say, okay, it's not looking good, the chances are very high that we're going to be low on forage, and I've got 120 days to start making these decisions. That's a lot of time to go make a sell decision, so that's how we use that data, is on the buy and sell decisions, literally every 16 days. But look, we're we take it to the next level beyond just your weekend warrior type rancher. No offense to weekend warriors, I would love to be one. That sounds pretty awesome. So anyways, hope that answered her question.
I had several questions come up, but in my own head, but so just so I don't take up too much time, so other people can ask questions, I'll just stick with one. I'm not familiar really with South Texas, since we graze in Northwest Arkansas, but I was wondering about hay, feeding hay. Do you feed hay? And if so, how do you decide how much? Things like that.
Yeah. I'm fortunate enough to be in a location where we have year-round grazing. So I do not feed hay out in the pastures. I'm a numbers guy, I'm an economics guy, and I find it very, very difficult to make a profit when you're feeding hay. Now, realizing that there are certain environments where that's not the case, but from my context in South Texas, if you're in a year-round production area or capable of year-round production, you should be able to not feed hay. Now, we do buy hay, Nina, because when we bring 800 head of cattle into the pens to sort, that's about a 2-day deal with 3 or 4 cowboys. We need to keep them content while they're sitting in a 30-acre lot waiting to come through the cycle through the pens, for whatever reason that may be, if we're preg checking heifers or whatever, you know what I mean? And it takes a lot of hay to feed 800 head. So when you're at the scale that we operate at, I highly recommend that you try to figure out how not to feed hay, because if you are in the situation where you're feeding, that is a full-time job for somebody when you have that many cattle. And you will go broke very fast if you're not watching your numbers carefully.
Mm-hmm.
We do supplement with protein tubs as needed in South Texas, because one of our in South Texas, our forages majorly lack the correct amount of protein to grow an animal for optimal animal performance, growing animals. And we get into these time periods where, especially when it gets dry for 6 or 8 months, that our protein levels just at first they're great, and then they just fall off because our forage does not lignify that protein up top very well. It loses it very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike if you're in, I don't know, if you're in the Kansas Flint Hills, when that stuff lignifies, that protein is amazing. Or up in Colorado in the mountains and Idaho, I mean, they have amazing protein levels in lignify grasses. Just it depends on your context. So,
I was just going to say that everything you say, it keeps reinforcing that context, how important context is.
I love this question from Kelly. That is the whole point of my entire presentation, was that these producers that say it's not economically feasible to adjust stocking rates, I just don't go for it. I don't know. And I could be wrong. There are probably certain situations where that may be true, Kelly. But look, are we going to treat it like a business or not? That's all I have to say that's what I would say to those people. Are you treating it like a business, or are we just ranching like granddad did 100 years ago? It takes some really careful thought to be successful in this business anymore. Ranching and farming and agriculture in general are really hard businesses. They're razor thin margins. And if you're going to be financially successful at it, it takes thought and consideration when it comes to this stuff. And you just do what you have to do. I don't think enough people are willing to adjust their herds. They're in love with their cows. I was just about to say what she said right there on that question. Is Kelly says, what about the responses from producers who say they spent generations building the genetics of their herd? Well, guess what? So did your neighbor 10 miles away. He probably did the same thing. And you can opportunistically go buy his cows whenever he hauls them off or something. You know what I mean? Like, my dad had that mentality, and it got him in a lot of trouble. And I've seen it get so many people in trouble. And what they do is they end up sacrificing either two things or both of them usually. And that's the economics and the ecology of the landscape if you have that mentality. So that's a pretty blunt answer, but unfortunately, a lot of people in the ranching business need blunt answers. That's why these peer groups are so important. You need somebody to bang you up a little bit once in a while. People that go to Ranching for Profit, when we sit there at Executive Link, I mean, they go out in tears sometimes. Not because somebody did it intentionally, they were mean to them. It's just they told them something that they knew was true, and they have a very hard mental time wrapping their head around. You know, these are very hard decisions to make, but you have to make them, or you make the sacrifice economically or ecologically, period. Realization can be hard. That is very true. Yeah. And I've been there. I mean, when I had Parker Creek Ranch going, we had built it up to about $1 million gross revenue direct marketing business. And my mentor had convinced me, well, he didn't have to convince me. I convinced myself, I should say, that he had these really great grass-fed genetics. And what it was a Red Devon Longhorn cross, right? So when it got dry here though, I was married to those cows whether I wanted to be or not, right? Because even though I knew I needed to get rid of them, I couldn't. Because if I took them to the sale barn, I've got to lean against those cattle, right? I've got a line, they're on a line of credit that has to be paid back, right? I mean, I can borrow money cheaper than I can use my own cash 99% of the time. And if you're going to take a half longhorn animal to the sale barn in a destocking situation or try to sell it to somebody else, that is way easier said than done. And it took me a number of years to realize that as much as I like the beef that came off those cattle and as great as they performed, they were a bad match from my context and the business that I was trying to run and the ecological goals that I was trying to achieve, because I was putting myself in a situation where I couldn't get rid of the damn things when I needed to. Simple as that. And just because I had my mindset on genetics, you know, some special genetics that I should be buying.
That's a super valuable insight. I was wondering if you had any other pointers that you've learned over throughout your years of experience of like how to maintain that kind of flexibility and agility to be able to make these quick adjustments throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, Nina, but I think one big thing is stop picking up the Kool-Aid magazines and reading too much about grazing and soil health and all these other things. And all those are very important. They're very important to understand. But what's more important is surviving economically. And everybody needs to start thinking about this stuff like a business. Okay, if you're really serious about it, you start thinking about it like a business and you let that ecological and economic decisions drive your decision making. And you'll be just fine. But you need to start picking up books and reading this kind of stuff, Getting Things Done by David Allen. And, you know, I've got another one on my desk. I mean, those are the types of things, and start getting that business mentality versus I'm in love with my cows mentality, you know, and I will sacrifice the ecology of my landscape because I love my cows and my economic checkbook, you know. So there's a Chase mentioned $40 an acre. That goes to the landlord, not me, Chase. That goes to the lessor. But you said, how do you factor that into your grazing management or brush management? So what we do when we lease a ranch, because here in South Texas, hunting is a big business. It makes a lot of money for landowners. What we do is we sit down with the landowners at least once a year, sometimes multiple times a year, to understand what his goals are for his landscape. And that's how we make our grazing management decisions and our brush management decisions and stuff like that. Is we sit down with the landowner and we have a one-on-one conversation about what are his goals, because ultimately, look, it's his ranch. I only own my Parker Creek Ranch, so I get to make the hunting and grazing decisions 100% of them here. You know, otherwise I'm at the mercy of other people, and we try to keep that holistic context present when we have those conversations. Business books I recommend. Oh, there's Linda, there's too many. There's too many to list here. I could put together I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put together a list of recommended reading, and I'll bring it to the field day and make sure you get a copy.
That'd be great. And we can share the list with everyone who's attended too, if you don't mind sitting down and at least picking your top 5.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Stan
There
says
you go.
post it to Soil for Water. That's great.
That's a good idea.
Anybody else have any questions? You can throw them in the chat. If not, I'll just keep asking mine.
Go ahead, Nina. What else you got?
Let me think. Okay. You mentioned when you early on in your presentation, you showed the side-by-side pictures of like before grazing and after grazing, and how people would say, you're not grazing this right. And you said, I'm grazing it fine. It's matching my goals. So I was wondering what, if you could describe, like when you look at that after picture, like what you see that fits your goals.
Well, for me, our goals on that ranch are, we try not to severely graze. Okay, number one, because when you're severely grazing with that many cattle, I'm essentially leaving 25 to 50% of the ranch behind me at any given time that's been severely grazed. Right now, there may be a paddock where I go into that's heavy brush that I do want to severely graze, right? Because I'm trying to knock the brush down, which cows will do that. And just reset succession in that brush, and there are times of the year when we do severely graze. For example, if we want to take away some of that litter right before the spring growth, we'll start severely grazing for like 30 days before spring, just to remove some litter. That was spring growth on switchgrass. And so spring growth is critical for what? We've got quail nesting at that time of the year. We've got fawns being born. We've got a lot of plants that need to annual, like wildflowers and legumes that are dropping seed at that time. We have a lot of pigeon pea on that ranch. We have a lot of Illinois bundleflower. We want to increase our nitrogen fixing legumes on the ranch. So I do want to let those go back to seed. And if I'm severely grazing them at that time of the year, I'm not going to achieve those results. So we try to, and of course, also in the spring, your goal is to move rapidly, leave quite a bit of leaf behind so that the plant recovers faster, because you're trying to keep up with those carbohydrates and stuff. Remember, you're just harvesting that top part of the plant. So, people tend to look at a picture, they know nothing about the context of that picture. But it was a pretty good graze for that time of the year for us, and we achieved the goals that we set out for. Economics of sheep and goats, my gosh. Yes, I have looked at the economics of them. I really like the economics of sheep and goats. I can't imagine, it's hard for me to get this paradigm out of my head of rotating sheep and goats through South Texas brush country with portable fencing. We use a system called Razor Grazer by Range Ward, a company that we just purchased about a year about a year ago now. It utilizes at scale electric fencing technology, these big reels that hold like 2 miles on there, and it's all electric. No more hand reels, mano a mano. I just can't imagine moving sheep and goats like that. I think it would be extremely labor intensive, and I kind of wonder if the economics don't start to go backwards when you get into labor intensive type of stuff like that, because labor tends to be one of the largest overheads that we experience in a ranching business. I think on smaller scale landscapes, it's awesome. Or in the Western landscapes where you have herders and the ability to herd on these big open landscapes, I think sheep and goats needs to be considered. And also really like the idea of their ecological impact that they can have on a landscape, especially woody species. So yeah, I would love to play around with it someday, maybe, we'll see. So well, what else do we have?
I have goats on our, we have a very small farm compared to yours, and we have goats, and my husband describes them as the Roomba of the farm. Like, we don't rotate them, they rotate themselves automatically and find what they need. While the cattle, we move those, but it's hard to tell goats where to go.
Well, I think if you stocked low enough, that probably works really well.
Yeah, it's a very small herd. So
stocked low, that works just fine. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. If you tried to, you could easily get into trouble if you overstocked. And
my experience with goats, my experience with goats goes so far as my wife has 2 milk goats that never got milked.
Yeah.
So they're by default like pets. They're like our dogs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like every farm has some accidental pets.
So.
Well, here's another question I had, and other people can post in the chat if they think of something, so I don't take all of the question and answer time, but how fast do you see improvement? Like, say you take on a new piece of leased land that hasn't been grazed in this way. How fast do you see improvement when you start using these systems?
It can happen. It depends on what you're looking at. Okay. So for example, with the high rainfall we had last year at Pajarito, we took the opportunity to rest some pastures a little more than we would have otherwise, because we just had super excess amount of forage that we needed more animals on there, honestly. But we had some herd health problems going on with foot rot with the stockers at the time that thank goodness we didn't have more animals there, because it would have been pretty disastrous as far as manpower goes and stuff like that. We used that opportunity where we had a lot of little blue stem in some pastures and a lot of really healthy native grasses to let them reseed and become more dense in the pastures, and it worked really well. So you can see improvements in species diversity in like 1 year, Now on the soil side of things, I think things tend to happen a lot slower. But like at Parker Creek Ranch, me and my wife moved back here in 2009. We were, we were of the mindset, we came at this from an ecological standpoint, and we knew we wanted to measure the soil, and Haney and all that stuff wasn't even hardly in existence back then. So we sent some basically conventional soil samples off to Texas Plant and Soil Lab. And we were, there wasn't a single pasture on this ranch that was like over 0.5% organic matter. I mean, it was incredible. My dad just toasted this place. And 7 years later, in measurements, we measured some pastures over 5% organic matter. But realizing that is 6 to 8 inches from the surface. And we need a better understanding of how that organic matter cycles through the environment. My hunch is that 6 to 8 inches cycles really rapidly if you make management changes. I think that deeper soil organic matter, which is probably ultimately more important when we talk about carbon sequestration and stuff, we're talking about 1 meter core samples. That carbon probably changes much slower. In fact, if at all, right? It will decrease if you till the soil or something like that, right? But it will only either stay steady or increase if you're doing the right kind of management, most likely anyways. That's all up for debate, but those are the kind of changes that we've seen. I mean, so some of them are faster than others. It just depends. I had a question from Kelly. Do you graze your cattle on federal allotments? I live in a state that is 98% privately owned. So my answer there would be no. I don't have any experience grazing on federal allotments. I do have a lot of people in my network that do. And that's where herding is becoming quite popular among grazers, is in these federal allotments. So herding is without using for those of you here that in herding or herding is where it's kind of the old fashioned cowboy, keeping the cattle bunched up and moving them every day, versus utilizing electric fences or other technology to do that. Now, I will mention there's some technology emerging that will likely impact the grazing on federal lands, and that's virtual fencing. Those of you that don't know about it here, check it out. I think it's going to have a huge impact on the way we graze large federal landscapes in the future. Virtual fencing will be something that is going to be a really neat technology to see how we can become better grazers on those landscapes. How do you negotiate a leasing rate for a new property? Ooh, that's a hard one. I usually ask the landowner first. Every single landowner has some idea in their head of what they think their leasing rate should be or shouldn't be, or, oh my gosh, so I've had leases happen as fast. I've leased probably 30 different properties over 13 years. Some of them I still have, some of them I don't. I've had some leases happen as fast as 1 day in a handshake deal, and we signed the lease documents in 7 days. I've had some of them take up to 6 months to negotiate. What do I look at on a property? That's a great question, Chase. So all that data that I was showing you, we do a full economic analysis of the historical forage production on that property. And we know that it takes a certain scale to achieve economic profitability on a ranch. And so we have built out economic models, really, really intricate, serious economic models that utilize forage calculations to understand what our stocking rate will approximately be and what our costs are going to be, our overhead and cost to carry. I've got all that figured out. And I can effectively know, hey, if I'm going into this lease, is it going to be profitable or not? Because if it's not, I'm not going to lease it. Or even if it has no chance of being profitable, I just won't lease it anymore. It's a business for us. I mean, I can't go lease a property that has no chance of being profitable. And it's mostly due to scale, unfortunately. It's just the economic reality that we live in agriculture. Is scale is critically important to economic success. And that's something that nobody ever talks about either. Anthony had a great question here. Are there ever situations where your economic KPIs and your ecological KPIs are asking for different actions? 100% yes, right? Finding the balance in those is the tricky part and the important part to do. And it can be done. I mean, we do it. But I cannot sacrifice the ecological balance on the property just for economic KPIs. I just can't do it because I'm working with ranchers who get $40 an acre for deer leases. And if I screw up the ecology, I will not have a lease, right? So the ecological KPI usually always comes first for us. But we've found a way where we can really balance that out. And we try to communicate that with the landowner and the deer hunters and everybody. We're very transparent with the people we do business with. So it helps, right? It helps us balance that out. Or those kind of, yep, that answered his second question. They're inherently pretty much coupled together. Great
I
question.
thought it was really interesting when you were presenting that like your buy sell decisions were based entirely on forage and rainfall, rather than like cattle futures or the cattle prices or whatever, like I'm sure those go and you consider those, but like the fact that the charts where you're tracking are
Yeah,
the ecological ones, or I thought that was interesting.
those are easy to track, Nina, the cattle futures. I mean, there's all sorts of places I can go to look at that data.
Mhm.
There isn't anywhere you can really go to track that other data. You have to do that yourself. Right. So yeah, it's we certainly watch what the market's doing. You know what I mean? That's by default part of our program. But I've also part of our business is separated ourselves from the market to an extent because we're in the grass finishing business. So I don't have to worry too much about it. The diversified as far as that goes. Yeah. But I've found some of the most financially successful operations are highly focused on one type of animal, one type of strategy. But those are the guys usually sacrificing, going back to Anthony Collins' question, those are the guys sacrificing the ecological KPIs, right? So, great question.
I think we have time for a couple more questions if anyone if any have occurred to anybody while we've been talking. So I have one. So you're able to at scale mass market your beef as grass finished cattle. You're not selling it to the mass market or anything.
No, we have buyers. We wholesale it now. We don't direct market anymore. We wholesale it to other retailers. Yeah, so it's a white label product. When you start to get to that kind of scale that we're at, you can't. I mean, you could direct market it, but that's another business. That's a whole separate business from growing livestock and being a
right.
So once again, focus is critically important when it comes to the business side of things. In regard to your point about scale and profit being so linked, what advice do you have? Here's a question in regard to your excellent point about scale and profit being so linked. What advice do you have those small farmers and ranchers out there who are limited by finances or land restrictions? Do the best you can, and just remember that your goal within your context may not be purely economic profit. It goes back to what I mentioned at the very beginning. For you, it may be it's about making sure that I'm taking care of this 20 acres of land the best of my ability, and being able to provide that lifestyle for myself or my children. Profit doesn't always have to be defined by money, is what I'll say to that question, because find me somebody that is making a really good living on small piece of land that isn't a market gardener. Okay, that's in livestock. It's really hard to do. I mean, even the poultry guys are like just killing themselves with labor, the pasture poultry people. We did pasture poultry for a long time. and with the cattle at Parker Creek. And so that's what I would say, is just remember that profit doesn't have to always be a financial return. You know, it can be other things too. And that's okay. That is okay.
It's a great question and a great answer. Thank you both. Well, before we run out of time, I need to remember to launch the final poll so you all can evaluate how we've done today. And I hope you'll take the time to fill it out so that we can improve in the future. And while that's up, you know, you can make some final statements, or there's a few more minutes to ask questions. There's the evaluation poll. Darron, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm new with NCAT too, and so I got to learn a lot here today as well.
Well, I think the thing for folks to remember is that it takes time to, you know, become a better grazer, to understand the landscape that you're working with, to understand the people that you're working with. And you know, it takes time and experience. It's not going to happen overnight. And the best thing that I would say to somebody new getting into this is just get started. Find a good mentor, you know, and the people that have been doing it, just keep doing the continuing education, try to challenge your paradigms. Maybe get your head out of the Stockman Grass Farmer once in a while and read a feedlot magazine or something. You know, I mean, I do that now, just to understand the other aspects of the cattle market and how other people are doing things. You know, challenge yourself if you're an experienced grazer or experienced livestock manager. So.
Yeah, I don't think you ever get to a point where you're like, that's it. I've reached. I'm a regenerative grazer. I have nothing left to learn. It's like there's no diploma. Like, it's just forever. You just keep learning forever. Every year is different. Nothing stays the same, and you can always improve.
I love our second question. It's how knowledgeable are you after? It's like, well, you know, kind of what I just said right there. It takes a long time to really get a hang of this.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
It is very, very complex, you know, when it comes down to it. So
I'm seeing lots of results rolling in. This is great. I really appreciate the feedback. And if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat. You can feel free to email me.
I'll put mine too. Feel free to email me as well.
Yeah, if any other questions come up, I'm not a Texas based specialist, so much more familiar with the Arkansas type soils and landscape and grazing, but happy to help where I can.
Nina, I'm gonna jump off. I gotta go pick my kids up.
All right.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate everything.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.